Hey friend, welcome to Sleepy History Universe. Before we begin tonight's journey, I have one small favor to ask. If this channel becomes a place you look forward to returning to, a place where the slow pace, calming storytelling, and gentle history help you unwind after a long day, please take a moment to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep creating these relaxing historical journeys for you. Now get comfortable, dim the lights if you can, and let's quietly step back in time together tonight. We're exploring what women in the 1950s really did all day. When most people imagine the 1950s, they picture spotless suburban homes, sparkling kitchens, smiling mothers in perfectly pressed dresses, and a life that seemed almost effortless. Vintage advertisements painted a world where everything looked cheerful, organized, and wonderfully simple. But behind those familiar images was a very different reality, long before modern conveniences became part of everyday life. Millions of women filled their days with an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, sewing, budgeting, raising children, caring for relatives, and quietly holding their households together. Their work rarely ended, and much of it went unnoticed because it happened behind closed front doors, far from newspaper headlines or history books. So tonight, we're going to slow down and step inside an ordinary home in the 1950s, not during a holiday or a famous historical event, but on a completely ordinary day. We'll follow the rhythm of the hours from the first light of dawn until the last lamp is switched off at night, discovering what life really looked like for the women who quietly shaped an entire generation. So settle into your favorite spot. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let the noise of today slowly fade away, because our journey into the hidden everyday life of the 1950s begins now. Imagine waking up as a woman in the 1950s before the sun had fully risen, when the quiet streets outside were still wrapped in morning mist, and the only sounds drifting through the neighborhood were birds beginning to sing, and the occasional rumble of an early delivery truck. The day often began long before anyone else in the house opened their eyes. There were no smartphones glowing on bedside tables, no coffee machines brewing automatically, and certainly no robotic vacuum cleaners waiting to tidy the floors. Instead, the first moments of the morning were filled with routines that had changed very little for decades. Many women slipped into a robe, tied back their hair, and headed straight to the kitchen where the stove had to be lit and breakfast carefully prepared from scratch. Eggs were cracked into pans, bacon slowly sizzled, toast browned beneath a broiler, oatmeal simmered in pots, and coffee percolated patiently, filling the house with its rich aroma. Every meal demanded attention because convenience foods, although becoming more common, had not yet replaced traditional cooking in most households. By the time the family gathered around the breakfast table, the meal was already waiting, hot and neatly presented. While everyone else focused on eating, the woman who prepared it often spent the meal standing, pouring another cup of coffee, buttering another slice of toast, or making sure no plate remained empty. Once breakfast ended, the kitchen looked as though another meal had already taken place. Dirty dishes covered the counters, crumbs scattered across the tablecloth, and pans still rested on the stove. Dishwashers existed in only a small number of homes, so nearly every plate, cup, fork, and saucepan had to be washed by hand. Warm, soapy water filled the sink while towels hung nearby for drying. This task alone could consume a surprising amount of time, especially in larger families where several children and working husbands meant mountains of dishes appeared 3 times every single day. After the dishes were stacked away, the kitchen itself had to sparkle. Counters were wiped clean, floors swept carefully, garbage emptied, and fresh dish towels folded neatly for the next meal. The rest of the house demanded equal attention. Dust gathered quickly because coal heating, fireplaces, and cigarette smoke were common parts of everyday life. Every shelf, picture frame, windowsill, and piece of furniture required regular dusting. Floors were swept with brooms before being vacuumed. Rugs were beaten outdoors to remove dirt, and polished wooden furniture received another careful coat of wax to preserve its shine. Windows were cleaned by hand until they reflected the sunlight without streaks. Bathrooms were scrubbed with brushes and strong cleaning powders, while mirrors were polished until every fingerprint disappeared. These chores repeated themselves almost daily because maintaining a spotless home was often viewed as a measure of pride and respectability. Laundry was one of the most exhausting responsibilities. Even though washing machines had become increasingly available, many households still relied on older models that demanded constant supervision. Clothes had to be sorted carefully, according to color and fabric. Heavy wet garments were lifted into machines, transferred to rinse tubs or wringers, and finally carried outside to clotheslines where they fluttered in the breeze beneath the open sky. Rain could suddenly interrupt the process, forcing everything back indoors. Once dry, every shirt, dress, apron, towel, and bedsheet required ironing. The iron itself became incredibly hot, and pressing an entire family's clothing could occupy hours. Crisp collars, perfectly flat trousers, neatly folded handkerchiefs, and wrinkle. Free dresses reflected not only cleanliness, but also personal discipline. For mothers with young children, household chores were only part of the day's work. Babies needed constant feeding, diaper changes, baths, and comforting. Disposable diapers were still uncommon, meaning cloth diapers had to be washed repeatedly throughout the day. Toddlers required supervision every moment because there were few electronic distractions to occupy them. Older children walked home from school expecting lunch, snacks, clean clothes, help with homework, and someone waiting to hear about their day. A mother often became teacher, nurse, referee, storyteller, and counselor, all within a single afternoon. Shopping itself looked completely different from modern life. Grocery stores carried fewer products than today's enormous supermarkets. Women frequently visited local butchers, bakeries, produce markets, and neighborhood grocers instead of purchasing everything in one place. Shopping usually involved walking from one shop to another, while carrying heavy bags home by hand or loading them into the family car if one was available. Fresh ingredients were chosen carefully because refrigeration space remained limited and food spoiled quickly. Weekly menus often depended on what was available rather than endless choices lining supermarket shelves. Preparing lunch and dinner occupied another large portion of the day. Recipes relied on fresh vegetables, cuts of meat that required long cooking times, homemade gravies, mashed potatoes, casseroles, soups, and freshly baked desserts. Measuring ingredients, peeling vegetables, kneading dough, stirring sauces, and checking ovens demanded patience rather than speed. Many women baked bread, cakes, or pies entirely from scratch, filling homes with comforting smells that lingered long after the meal ended. Family dinners held enormous importance, and many households expected everyone to sit together around the table each evening. Presentation mattered almost as much as taste, so tablecloths, matching dishes, polished silverware, and folded napkins transformed ordinary meals into daily rituals. Although the image of the perfect suburban housewife became famous through magazines, advertisements, and television, reality varied enormously. Millions of women worked outside the home because financial necessity left little alternative. Secretaries typed letters on mechanical typewriters. Nurses cared for overflowing hospital wards. Teachers instructed crowded classrooms. Waitresses hurried between restaurant tables. Telephone operators connected calls manually, and factory workers assembled products during long shifts. These women completed demanding jobs before returning home to perform many of the same household responsibilities expected of full-time homemakers. Their workday often continued well into the evening, leaving little opportunity for rest. Social expectations shaped nearly every decision. Appearance carried significant importance, even while performing ordinary chores. Women frequently styled their hair in rollers before beginning housework, applied light makeup, wore dresses rather than trousers, and changed into cleaner clothing before their husbands returned home from work. Magazine articles regularly encouraged women to remain cheerful, attractive, organized, and endlessly patient regardless of exhaustion. Many advertisements suggested that a sparkling kitchen or freshly baked pie represented the secret to a happy marriage, while countless women genuinely enjoyed caring for their families. Others quietly struggled beneath expectations that rarely acknowledged fatigue or personal ambition. Afternoons sometimes offered brief opportunities for community life. Neighbors visited one another for coffee, church groups, organized charitable events, sewing circles, exchanged patterns, book clubs gathered in living rooms, and parent organizations planned school activities. These social gatherings strengthened friendships while also creating support networks where women shared advice, recipes, family concerns, and neighborhood news. Without social media or instant messaging, these face-to-face conversations formed an essential part of everyday life. Entertainment during quiet moments remained remarkably simple. A radio might play popular music or serialized dramas, while chores continued in the background. Some households gathered around a television during the evening, though programming lasted only a limited number of hours. Reading magazines, writing letters, knitting sweaters, mending socks, sewing dresses, gardening, or tending flower beds filled whatever spare time remained. Many women developed remarkable sewing skills because repairing worn clothing often cost far less than replacing it. Curtains, aprons, pillowcases, children's outfits, and holiday decorations could all emerge from a sewing machine placed in the corner of the living room. Financial management also rested heavily on many women's shoulders. Household budgets required careful planning because a single paycheck often supported an entire family. Every grocery purchase, utility bill, clothing expense, and school supply had to fit within strict limits. Coupons were clipped from newspapers, leftovers transformed into entirely new meals, and nothing useful was wasted. Glass jars became storage containers, worn towels turned into cleaning rags, and scraps of fabric found new life in quilts or children's clothing. Resourcefulness was not celebrated as a hobby, but practiced as an everyday necessity. Evenings rarely marked the end of responsibilities. Dinner dishes filled the sink once again. Lunches for the following day needed preparation. Children's clothes were laid out, baths supervised, Stories read aloud and bedtime routines completed. Only after the entire household settled into sleep could many women finally sit quietly with a cup of tea, finish a chapter of a novel, listen to the final radio broadcast, or simply enjoy a few peaceful minutes before beginning the same cycle again the next morning. As the evening settled over the neighborhood and porch lights slowly flickered to life, another part of the day quietly unfolded. Husbands returned from work, carrying briefcases, lunch pails, or simply the exhaustion of a long shift, while children raced through the front door filled with stories from school or adventures with friends. For many women, this was not the moment to finally relax, but rather the beginning of another series of responsibilities. Dinner had to be served at the right temperature, often with every dish arriving on the table at precisely the right time. Timing was important because many families believed eating together each evening was one of the most important parts of the day. The roast needed to remain juicy. Vegetables could not become overcooked. Gravy had to stay warm, and fresh bread or rolls were expected to accompany the meal. A successful dinner required planning that had actually begun hours earlier, with ingredients prepared throughout the afternoon. Conversation around the dinner table varied from family to family, but it often revolved around school lessons, neighborhood events, work stories, church activities, or plans for the coming weekend. Television usually remained switched off during the meal, if a family even owned one. Children were encouraged to practice good manners, chew with their mouths closed, sit properly, and politely ask to leave the table once everyone had finished eating. Parents viewed mealtime as an opportunity to teach discipline and family values just as much as nutrition. When dinner ended, there was rarely a break before another wave of chores arrived. Every plate, serving bowl, cooking pot, and utensil once again found its way into the sink. Soap bubbles filled the kitchen while towels dried freshly washed dishes one by one. In larger households, this routine repeated itself without fail every single evening. The kitchen floor might receive another quick sweep before bedtime to remove crumbs, while leftovers were carefully stored for tomorrow's lunch. Nothing useful was wasted if it could become another meal. Children's evenings required just as much attention. Homework had to be checked carefully, spelling words practiced aloud, arithmetic problems reviewed, and reading assignments completed. Mothers frequently sat beside young children, helping them learn to read, sounding out difficult words or listening patiently as they stumbled through paragraphs. School projects often became family projects, with construction paper, glue, scissors, crayons, and cardboard spread across the kitchen table after dinner. Long before internet searches or online learning existed, finding information often meant opening encyclopedias or visiting the local library another day. Bedtime routines reflected another rhythm that has largely disappeared today. Younger children were bathed in metal tubs or porcelain bathtubs, their pajamas laid neatly on beds before they climbed beneath heavy blankets. Mothers read fairy tales, Bible stories, or adventure books while children listened beneath soft bedside lamps. Goodnight kisses, bedtime prayers, and reminders not to let the bedbugs bite became familiar rituals repeated every evening across countless homes. Only after the children had gone to sleep could many women finally turn their attention toward unfinished household tasks. Torn clothing waited to be repaired. Buttons had fallen from shirts. Socks contained small holes that required careful darning with needle and thread. A dress might need its hem adjusted before Sunday church services. Curtains occasionally required mending after years of sunlight weakened the fabric. Sewing was not simply a hobby, but an essential household skill that stretched the family budget much further than buying replacements. The quiet hours of the evening also became a time for planning. Grocery lists were written carefully on scraps of paper. Household accounts were updated in notebooks where every penny spent was recorded. Bills were placed in envelopes, calendars marked with birthdays, church meetings, school events, or doctor appointments. Since many families depended on a single income, careful financial planning could determine whether there would be enough money for new shoes, school supplies, Christmas gifts, or even unexpected repairs. Many women also spent evenings preparing food for the following day, dry beans soaked overnight. Bread dough was mixed and left to rise. Vegetables were peeled in advance, or leftovers were transformed into ingredients for tomorrow's casserole. Efficient planning saved valuable time during the busy morning hours. Experience taught women exactly how to organize an entire household so that every task flowed naturally into the next despite endless responsibilities. Moments of personal enjoyment still appeared. Some women sat quietly with knitting needles, creating sweaters, scarves, blankets, or baby clothes. Others crocheted lace tablecloths, embroidered pillowcases, or completed intricate stitch patterns that decorated their homes for years. Handmade items carried tremendous value because they represented hours of patient craftsmanship. Receiving a handmade quilt or sweater was often considered one of the most thoughtful gifts imaginable. Reading remained another treasured escape. Women's magazines filled with recipes, decorating ideas, fashion trends, and family advice sat beside novels borrowed from local libraries. Romance stories, mysteries, historical adventures, and biographies offered temporary journeys beyond everyday routines. Letters from relatives living in distant states or overseas were read several times before being carefully folded away. Writing replies required patience, because every letter might take days or even weeks to arrive at its destination. Neighborhood life itself looked very different from the modern world. Front porches were gathering places where families sat together after sunset, enjoying cooler evening air while greeting neighbors strolling along sidewalks. Children played games until streetlights signaled it was time to come home. Hopscotch squares covered sidewalks with chalk. Jump ropes slapped against pavement. Bicycles rolled through quiet streets, and baseball games continued in empty lots until darkness finally arrived. Mothers often watched these scenes from porches while chatting with nearby neighbors about school events, recipes, local news, or upcoming church picnics. Church played an especially important role in many women's weekly lives. Beyond Sunday services, churches organized charity drives, bake sales, youth groups, choir rehearsals, sewing circles, and community dinners. Women frequently volunteered countless hours preparing meals for families experiencing hardship, organizing clothing donations, decorating sanctuaries for holidays, or visiting elderly neighbors who needed companionship. These volunteer efforts rarely appeared in history books, yet they strengthened entire communities. Not every woman's life resembled the cheerful suburban advertisements that filled magazines. Rural women often faced even more demanding routines. Farm life required collecting eggs before breakfast, feeding chickens, milking cows, tending gardens, preserving vegetables for winter, chopping wood, and helping during harvest seasons. Their work extended far beyond housekeeping because the family's livelihood depended on everyone's contribution. Long days under the hot summer sun or freezing winter mornings became normal parts of everyday existence. City life brought different challenges. Apartment living offered less space, but often meant climbing several flights of stairs carrying groceries, sharing laundry facilities, or managing without private yards where children could safely play. Crowded neighborhoods created stronger social connections, but also demanded adaptability to smaller living spaces and constant activity surrounding busy streets. The arrival of new household appliances gradually transformed daily life throughout the decade, though change happened slowly. Refrigerators replaced older ice boxes in many homes, reducing the need for daily ice deliveries. Electric mixers simplified baking. Improved washing machines eased some of the burden of laundry. Vacuum cleaners became more common. Yet every new appliance promised to save time while expectations for spotless homes grew even higher. Rather than eliminating work entirely, technology often raised standards of cleanliness and efficiency. Fashion itself influenced daily routines more than many people realize. Dresses with full skirts, fitted waists, stockings, gloves, hats, and carefully styled hairstyles required regular maintenance. Hair appointments could last hours, while home styling often involved sleeping in curlers overnight or spending mornings carefully arranging every strand into fashionable shapes. Clothes were brushed, pressed, and stored neatly because replacing them frequently remained expensive. Perhaps one of the least visible parts of a 1950s woman's day involved emotional labor. She remembered birthdays, organized holiday celebrations, comforted sick children, welcomed visiting relatives, resolved arguments between siblings, cared for aging parents, planned family vacations, prepared Christmas traditions, and created a sense of stability that family members often took for granted. Much of this work left no physical evidence, yet it shaped the emotional atmosphere of the entire household. As midnight approached, silence gradually settled across the home. The final kitchen light switched off. The last toy was picked up from the living room floor. Curtains were drawn closed, doors locked, tomorrow's clothing laid neatly over chairs, and alarm clocks carefully wound before being placed beside the bed. Weekends often looked different from weekdays, but they were rarely less demanding. Saturday mornings usually began with an even longer list of chores because the entire family was home. Bedsheets were stripped from mattresses and replaced with freshly washed linens that smelled of sunshine after drying outdoors. Mattresses were sometimes lifted to air out, pillows were fluffed, and heavy blankets were shaken vigorously from upstairs windows or across backyard clotheslines. Carpets received their most thorough cleaning of the week, with furniture pushed aside so every corner could be reached. Children were often assigned simple responsibilities such as dusting shelves, polishing shoes, or helping to weed the garden. But mothers usually supervised every task to ensure it was completed properly. The backyard was another place where much of a woman's day could disappear. Vegetable gardens supplied tomatoes, carrots, beans, onions, potatoes, and lettuce that reduced grocery expenses, while providing fresh ingredients for family meals. Flower beds required regular watering, pruning, and weeding, especially during spring and summer. Hanging laundry outside meant constantly watching the weather, because an unexpected rain shower could soak freshly washed clothes in minutes. The sight of white sheets billowing gently in the breeze became one of the most familiar images of suburban neighborhoods throughout the decade. Food preservation demanded remarkable patience and skill. Families could not always rely on supermarkets carrying every fruit and vegetable throughout the year, so women spent entire days preserving seasonal produce. Fresh peaches became jars of preserves, cucumbers turned into pickles, strawberries into jam, and tomatoes into sauces stored carefully for winter months. Kitchens grew warm from boiling water baths used for canning, while rows of glass jars slowly filled pantry shelves. Every sealed jar represented future meals already prepared months in advance. Holiday seasons increased responsibilities dramatically. Christmas did not simply arrive through online shopping or overnight deliveries. Gifts were planned months ahead, often handmade whenever possible. Cookies, fruit cakes, candies, and festive meals required days of preparation. Decorations were unpacked carefully, homemade ornaments repaired, greeting cards handwritten individually, and presents wrapped neatly with ribbons saved from previous years whenever they could be reused. Thanksgiving meant roasting large turkeys, preparing several side dishes simultaneously, baking multiple pies, and often hosting extended family members inside homes that suddenly became wonderfully crowded. Birthday celebrations followed a similar pattern. Instead of ordering cakes from large bakeries, many mothers baked and decorated them at home. Streamers, balloons, sandwiches, homemade lemonade, and simple party games transformed ordinary living rooms into cheerful gathering places. Every detail reflected hours of unseen preparation completed before the first guest arrived. Illness brought another entirely different set of duties. When children caught chickenpox, measles, influenza, or common colds, mothers often became full-time caregivers around the clock. Temperatures were checked repeatedly with glass thermometers. Soup simmered on the stove. Cool cloths rested on foreheads. Medicines were measured carefully, and long nights passed beside beds waiting for fevers to fall. Hospitals were generally reserved for more serious conditions, meaning much of everyday healthcare happened inside the family home. Many women also cared for elderly parents or relatives without calling themselves caregivers. Aging grandparents sometimes moved into family homes, creating multi-generational households where additional cooking, cleaning, and emotional support became part of daily life. Looking after older relatives while raising children and managing household responsibilities required remarkable patience and careful organization. Transportation also shaped daily routines. Many families owned only one automobile, which was usually taken to work by the husband during the day. As a result, women frequently walked considerable distances, pushing baby strollers, carrying groceries, or accompanying children to school and local shops. Public transportation served many cities, but in smaller towns walking remained the most common way to complete everyday errands. A trip to purchase groceries, visit the post office, stop by the pharmacy, and collect fabric from a sewing store could easily occupy an entire morning. Letters remained one of the strongest connections between distant family members. Writing them was considered both an obligation and a pleasure. Women often spent quiet afternoons composing thoughtful messages describing children's progress, neighborhood news, birthdays, holidays, and family milestones. Beautiful handwriting was admired, and letters sometimes stretched across several carefully folded pages. Weeks later, receiving a reply brought genuine excitement because every envelope carried news that could not arrive any faster. Telephone calls were usually shorter and less frequent than today. Long-distance conversations remained relatively expensive, encouraging families to reserve them for important occasions. Many neighborhoods even shared party-line telephone systems where several households used the same telephone line. Privacy could not always be guaranteed, so conversations tended to remain brief and practical. Face-to-face visits therefore remained far more important than digital communication could ever replace. The education of daughters often extended beyond school lessons. Mothers passed along practical knowledge through everyday activities rather than formal instruction. Young girls learned how to sew buttons, prepare family recipes, iron clothing, arrange flowers, bake bread, write thank you letters, polish silverware, care for younger siblings, and welcome guests politely. These lessons reflected the expectations of the era, preparing daughters for responsibilities society believed they would one day assume themselves. Sunday carried its own rhythm entirely separate from the rest of the week. Families dressed in their finest clothes for church services, with carefully pressed suits, polished shoes, hats, gloves, and dresses, appearing only on special occasions. Sunday lunch often became the largest meal of the week, bringing together grandparents, cousins, uncles, and aunts around crowded dining tables. Roast beef, chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, pies, and homemade desserts filled tables with comforting abundance. Afterward, adults talked while children played outdoors until evening approached. Despite these traditions, many women quietly dreamed about possibilities beyond domestic life. Some attended evening classes, hoping to continue their education. Others read widely about science, literature, politics, travel, or world events, even when society expected their interests to remain centered entirely on home and family. A number of women volunteered in hospitals, libraries, museums, and community organizations, discovering talents that reached far beyond household management. Although opportunities remained limited compared to later decades, ambition certainly existed behind many front doors. The image presented in advertisements often suggested that every woman greeted each day with endless smiles and perfect confidence. Real life was naturally much more complicated. There were days of frustration when children misbehaved, recipes failed, washing refused to dry before rain arrived, appliances broke unexpectedly, illnesses spread through the household, or carefully planned budgets suddenly collapsed because of an expensive repair. There were moments of loneliness when husbands worked long hours or relatives lived hundreds of miles away. There were evenings when exhaustion made even small tasks feel overwhelming. Yet these quieter realities rarely appeared in magazine photographs or television commercials. What history sometimes forgets is how much practical expertise these women developed simply through experience. They became skilled cooks without culinary schools, capable accountants without business degrees, experienced nurses without medical licenses, talented teachers without classrooms, and efficient managers without corporate titles. Running a household required planning, organization, negotiation, budgeting, scheduling, maintenance, childcare, nutrition, cleaning, and problem solving every single day. If viewed through a modern lens, Many of these responsibilities would now be divided among numerous professions. Perhaps the greatest misconception is that every day looked exactly the same. In truth, life constantly presented unexpected challenges. A washing machine might suddenly stop working halfway through laundry day. Neighbors could appear unexpectedly asking for help. A child might scrape a knee while playing outside. Relatives could arrive without notice for dinner. Heavy snowstorms might interrupt deliveries, or summer heat waves could spoil food more quickly than expected. Successful homemaking depended upon flexibility just as much as routine. As another night settled over the neighborhood and lights gradually disappeared behind curtains, countless women completed one final walk through their homes. They checked that windows were closed, lunches prepared, school books packed, milk bottles brought inside, and tomorrow's grocery list waiting on the kitchen counter. Everything was arranged so the following morning could begin as smoothly as possible. It was a quiet ending to another long day that few outside the family would ever fully appreciate. Yet within those ordinary hours lived extraordinary dedication. For many women, the changing seasons transformed the rhythm of daily life in ways that people today rarely experience. Spring meant opening windows after a long winter and beginning the enormous task known as spring cleaning. This was far more than ordinary tidying. Every curtain was removed and washed, every cabinet emptied, every shelf wiped clean, and every piece of furniture moved so hidden dust could finally be swept away. Closets were reorganized, winter clothing packed into storage boxes, and lighter dresses brought out for the warmer months ahead. Blankets were aired outdoors, mattresses turned over, and windows polished until sunlight poured freely into every room. The process could take days, even weeks, but finishing it brought a sense of accomplishment that marked the beginning of a new season. Summer created an entirely different set of responsibilities. Before air conditioning became common, keeping a home comfortable during hot weather required creativity. Windows were opened early in the morning before temperatures climbed. Curtains were closed during the hottest hours to block direct sunlight, and electric fans worked constantly to move warm air through the house. Cooking large meals over a hot stove became uncomfortable, so lighter dishes such as cold salads, sandwiches, or meals prepared early in the day often appeared on the table. Children spent much of their vacation outdoors, returning home covered in dirt, grass stains, and scraped knees, creating extra laundry and countless baths before bedtime. Fresh fruits and vegetables reached their peak during summer, and many women took advantage of the abundance by freezing, drying, or preserving food for the colder months. Kitchens became busy workshops where peaches were peeled, berries sorted, corn cut from cobs, and vegetables packed into jars or wrapped carefully for freezers if the family owned one. These long hours of preparation ensured that homegrown produce could still be enjoyed months later when gardens rested beneath winter frost. Autumn brought another wave of preparation. Sweaters, heavier blankets, and winter coats were removed from storage, checked for damage, brushed clean, and repaired if necessary. Gardens were cleared after harvest, leaves raked into enormous piles, and firewood stacked neatly for colder evenings in homes that relied on fireplaces or wood, burning stoves. School had started again, meaning lunches had to be packed every morning. Homework returned to the evening schedule, and children's rapidly growing bodies often required new shoes or larger clothes before winter arrived. Winter created its own challenges especially in colder regions. Snow had to be tracked carefully through entryways to keep floors dry and safe. Wet mittens, scarves and boots lined up near radiators or heaters after children returned from school. Heavy meals such as stews, soups, casseroles and freshly baked bread became more common because they warmed families after long days spent in freezing temperatures. Holiday preparations blended naturally into winter routines, making the final months of the year especially busy. The role of hospitality also occupied an important place in many women's lives. Guests often arrived with little or no advance notice, and it was considered polite to welcome them warmly regardless of the time of day. Coffee was brewed, cookies or slices of homemade cake appeared on serving plates, and living rooms were quickly straightened before visitors settled into conversation. Maintaining a home that was always ready for unexpected company reflected both pride and social expectation. Many women became remarkably skilled at transforming an ordinary afternoon into a pleasant gathering within just a few minutes. Children's clothing required constant attention because most families could not afford to replace garments whenever they became damaged. Knees worn through on trousers received fabric patches stitched carefully into place. Torn sleeves were mended almost invisibly. Dresses could be altered to fit younger sisters, while larger shirts were shortened for younger brothers. A talented homemaker often extended the life of clothing by several years, simply through careful repairs. Even worn-out garments found new purposes, becoming dustcloths, quilt pieces, aprons, or cleaning rags instead of being thrown away. School events became another regular responsibility. Mothers attended parent meetings, prepared refreshments for school functions, organized bake sales, helped decorate classrooms for holidays, and volunteered during festivals or performances. Many schools depended heavily upon parents, particularly mothers, whose unpaid work supported activities that otherwise might never have taken place. Their contribution strengthened relationships between schools and communities while creating memorable experiences for children. Pets also became part of everyday routines. Dogs needed feeding before breakfast and walks throughout the day. Cats expected fresh milk or food waiting in bowls. Chickens required daily care in rural communities, while rabbits, birds, and other small animals often depended upon children with mothers quietly ensuring those responsibilities were actually completed. Looking after family pets added another layer of routine to already busy schedules. The arrival of guests staying overnight increased the workload considerably. Spare bedrooms had to be prepared with clean sheets, extra towels placed neatly in bathrooms, meals expanded to feed additional people, and entertainment planned for evenings together. Although these visits created more work, they also strengthened family bonds at a time when relatives often lived too far away for frequent travel. Many women became experts at making homes feel welcoming despite limited financial resources. Fresh flowers gathered from gardens decorated dining tables, handmade curtains brightened windows. Furniture was rearranged occasionally to give rooms a fresh appearance without spending any money. Holiday decorations were stored carefully year after year, repaired whenever possible instead of replaced. Creativity often mattered more than expensive possessions. For women living in small towns, local businesses became familiar parts of daily life. The butcher knew each family's favorite cuts of meat. The baker remembered regular customers by name. Shopkeepers asked about children, holidays, and relatives, because shopping involved genuine conversation rather than quick transactions. These relationships created strong communities where neighbors frequently helped one another during difficult times. Unexpected visitors such as traveling salesmen, delivery drivers, or relatives passing through town often appeared during ordinary afternoons. Milk bottles might arrive on the doorstep each morning, newspapers landed neatly near the front door, and laundry or dry cleaning occasionally required collection. Managing these small interruptions demanded flexibility throughout the day while still completing every planned task before evening. Although household responsibilities consumed much of their time, many women found quiet satisfaction in watching their families thrive because of their efforts. Seeing children leave for school wearing clean clothes, serving a meal everyone genuinely enjoyed, receiving compliments on a beautifully maintained home, or hearing relatives praise a favorite family recipe offered a sense of accomplishment that no paycheck could easily measure. These moments reminded them that the countless small tasks completed each day created comfort, stability, and happiness for the people they loved. At the same time, many women quietly questioned whether their talents might have reached beyond the walls of their homes if greater opportunities had been available. Some possessed remarkable mathematical abilities, artistic gifts, scientific curiosity, leadership skills, or entrepreneurial ideas, while a number successfully pursued careers despite social expectations. Countless others expressed their creativity through cooking, sewing, gardening, music, writing, volunteer work, or raising children who later carried those lessons into future generations. Looking back from the present, it becomes clear that the daily life of a 1950s woman cannot be reduced to a single stereotype. Some lived comfortably in expanding suburbs. Others struggled on isolated farms, worked demanding factory shifts, managed family businesses, or balanced employment with motherhood. Their experiences differed according to income, race, geography, education, and personal ambition. Yet one truth connected millions of them regardless of circumstance. Almost every hour of the day carried responsibility. From the moment they opened their eyes before sunrise until the final light in the house was switched off at night, their days were filled with work that kept families fed, clothed, healthy, organized, and emotionally supported. Much of that labor passed unnoticed because it happened quietly behind front doors, without applause or public recognition. Yet those ordinary acts of care shaped childhoods, strengthened neighborhoods, preserved traditions, and formed the invisible foundation upon which much of everyday life in the 1950s quietly depended. Beyond the routines that filled every hour, there were countless small habits that quietly defined everyday life for women during the 1950s. One of these was the constant awareness of appearances. Even if no visitors were expected, many women believed the house should remain presentable at all times. A neighbor might stop by unexpectedly, a relative could arrive without notice, or the milkman might need a quick signature at the door. Because of this, the front room was often kept especially tidy, with cushions neatly arranged, magazines stacked carefully on coffee tables, and polished furniture reflecting the afternoon sunlight. It was not unusual for children to be reminded not to play roughly in the living room, because that space represented the family's public face. The kitchen, however, remained the true center of the home. Throughout the day, it changed roles repeatedly. At breakfast, it became a busy dining room. By mid-morning, it turned into a workplace where vegetables were peeled, dough was kneaded, and recipes were prepared for later meals. During the afternoon, it often became a classroom where children completed homework under their mother's watchful eye. In the evening, it transformed once again into a gathering place where conversations continued long after dinner had ended. The kitchen table witnessed countless ordinary moments that never appeared in family photographs, but remained deeply memorable for those who experienced them. Many women also developed an incredible ability to estimate time without constantly checking a clock. Bread rising on the counter, a roast slowly cooking in the oven, laundry drying on the clothesline, and children returning home from school all followed predictable rhythms. Experience taught them exactly when to begin each task, so that everything came together almost effortlessly. A meal that appeared simple on the dining table often represented several hours of carefully coordinated work, completed almost entirely from memory. Telephone conversations with friends frequently served as brief moments of companionship during otherwise busy days. Since cordless phones did not exist, calls were made while standing in one corner of the kitchen, often with one hand holding the receiver and the other continuing to stir soup or fold freshly dried towels. Conversations usually remained practical, discussing recipes, neighborhood events, school activities, or asking whether someone could borrow a baking dish or sewing pattern. These short exchanges helped women remain connected even while household work continued uninterrupted. Fashion magazines and mail order catalogues also occupied an interesting place in everyday life. They were not simply sources of entertainment, but practical references. Women studied clothing designs they hoped to recreate at home using their sewing machines. Curtains, tablecloths, children's pajamas, and even winter coats could sometimes be made from patterns ordered through the mail. A talented seamstress could produce garments that looked remarkably similar to expensive store, bought clothing while spending only a fraction of the cost. Hair care required remarkable patience compared to modern routines. Achieving fashionable hairstyles often involved washing hair only once or twice each week. Because styling demanded so much effort, women slept with rollers or tightly pinned curls, covering them with scarves overnight to preserve the style for several days. Visits to beauty salons became special occasions where hours were spent chatting, while hair was washed, curled, dried beneath large hooded dryers, and carefully arranged into fashionable shapes. Maintaining these hairstyles required planning, because rain, wind, or even an especially active day could undo hours of careful work. The family radio remained a constant companion inside many homes. Throughout the day, it provided music, news bulletins, comedy programs, soap operas, cooking advice, and serialized dramas that women followed faithfully from week to week. Unlike modern streaming services, programs aired at fixed times. So many homemakers organized parts of their daily schedule around favorite broadcasts. A familiar voice coming from the radio could make long hours of ironing or sewing feel far less lonely. Weather influenced nearly every household decision. Bright sunshine encouraged washing large loads of laundry because clothes dried quickly outdoors. Rain delayed cleaning rugs, postponed gardening, and forced children to remain indoors, creating more noise and additional cleaning afterward. Winter storms required extra food supplies, while summer heat encouraged preserving vegetables before they spoiled. Every season brought its own challenges, and experienced homemakers learned to adjust routines almost instinctively. Another responsibility involved caring for household items so they would last as long as possible. Caste Iron pans were seasoned carefully after each use, instead of simply washed. Wooden cutting boards received regular oiling to prevent cracking. Silverware was polished until it shone brightly during holiday meals. Shoes were cleaned and polished every week rather than replaced when they became worn. Blankets were repaired, umbrellas mended, clocks wound by hand, and furniture protected with cloth covers to reduce wear. Owning fewer possessions encouraged families to value and maintain what they already had. Many women also became skilled hosts for community events. Church gatherings, neighborhood meetings, bridal showers, baby showers, and afternoon tea parties often took place inside private homes. Preparing for these occasions meant baking extra desserts, arranging flowers, polishing serving trays, ironing tablecloths, and ensuring enough chairs were available for every guest. Hospitality was considered an important social skill, and making visitors feel comfortable reflected positively on the entire household. The role of memory cannot be overlooked. Without digital calendars, reminder apps, or online shopping lists, women remembered an astonishing amount of information entirely from experience. They knew when children needed vaccinations, when relatives celebrated birthdays, which neighbor preferred tea over coffee, which family recipes required preparing a day in advance, and exactly how much flour remained in the pantry without checking. Their minds functioned as calendars, recipe books, appointment planners, and household inventories all at once. There were also quiet moments that belonged entirely to them, although they were often brief. Sitting beside an open window during the early morning with the first cup of coffee before everyone else awoke, watching sunlight move slowly across the kitchen floor while peeling apples for a pie, listening to birds singing outside while hanging freshly washed sheets on the clothesline, reading a few pages of a novel before bed after the house had finally grown silent. These peaceful moments offered small opportunities to pause before the next responsibility arrived. As the years passed, many women witnessed tremendous changes unfolding around them. Television gradually entered more living rooms, supermarkets expanded, household appliances became increasingly sophisticated, and social expectations slowly began to evolve. Yet throughout much of the decade, everyday life still depended upon personal effort rather than convenience. Meals were prepared by hand, homes were maintained through physical labor, clothing lasted because it was repaired instead of replaced, and family traditions survived because someone invested the time to preserve them. Perhaps that is what made the daily lives of so many 1950s women remarkable. They rarely viewed themselves as extraordinary. They simply woke each morning, completed one responsibility after another, solved unexpected problems as they appeared, cared for those around them, and prepared quietly for tomorrow before going to sleep. Their work was repetitive, often exhausting, and seldom celebrated, but it created a sense of order and security that families relied upon without always recognizing. The history of the 1950s is often remembered through shiny automobiles, suburban neighborhoods, rock and roll music, and growing prosperity. Yet behind every one of those familiar images stood millions of women whose ordinary days were filled with extraordinary dedication. Their names may never appear in history books, but their steady hands, patient routines, practical knowledge, and unwavering commitment shaped daily life in ways that continue to influence families even today. As one ordinary week blended into the next, many women hardly noticed how much of their lives revolved around anticipation rather than reaction. They were constantly thinking several steps ahead. Before breakfast was even finished, they were already considering what would be served for lunch. While folding freshly dried clothes, they were mentally planning tomorrow's shopping trip. As children played in the backyard, they were remembering which library books needed returning, which school permission slips required signatures, and whether there was enough sugar left in the pantry to bake a cake for the weekend. Much of their work happened long before anyone else realized it needed to be done. The neighborhood itself often functioned almost like an extended family. Women watched over each other's children without being asked, accepted packages for neighbors who were away, exchanged extra vegetables from backyard gardens, and shared recipes that had been passed down through generations. If someone's husband became ill or a new baby arrived, nearby women frequently organized meals, visited with groceries, or offered to help with household chores. These acts of kindness rarely attracted attention because they were considered normal parts of community life. Shopping trips were often social occasions rather than hurried errands. Women greeted familiar store owners by name, discussed recent neighborhood news while waiting in line, and compared prices carefully before making purchases. A butcher might recommend a particular cut of meat, while the baker suggested fresh bread that had just come from the oven. These relationships built trust over many years, making local businesses important gathering places where people exchanged news almost as often as they exchanged money. Children usually spent long hours outdoors, especially during pleasant weather, which gave mothers a slightly different rhythm to their afternoons. Windows remained open so they could hear children's laughter drifting in from the street, while continuing with indoor chores. Every so often they stepped onto the porch to check that everyone remained safe before returning to sewing, cooking, or cleaning. They rarely needed to schedule playdates because neighborhood children naturally gathered together after school and during holidays. The family photograph albums slowly grew thicker over the years, but every picture represented a carefully chosen moment because cameras used film rather than unlimited digital storage. Mothers often organized family portraits, ensured children wore their best clothes, straightened collars, smoothed hair, and reminded everyone to smile before the shutter clicked. Once photographs were developed days or weeks later, they were carefully placed into albums that families would revisit for decades. Rainy days brought an entirely different atmosphere inside the house. Instead of outdoor games, children spread board games across dining tables, built forts from blankets, colored with crayons, or listened to stories read aloud. Mothers found themselves preparing extra snacks, settling small disagreements, and inventing activities to keep energetic children occupied while continuing with household work. The sound of rain against windows mixed with the smell of fresh baking often created some of the most comforting memories of childhood. Many women also became surprisingly knowledgeable about basic home maintenance. They knew how to replace loose buttons, tighten simple furniture joints, patch small holes in walls, oil squeaky door hinges, unclog household drains, and perform countless minor repairs without waiting for professional help. Resourcefulness saved both time and money, especially when family budgets remained tight. Pets often followed women from room to room throughout the day. A family dog slept beneath the kitchen table while meals were prepared. A cat stretched comfortably in patches of afternoon sunlight, or birds chirped from cages hanging near windows. Caring for animals became another quiet responsibility woven naturally into daily routines. Feeding them, cleaning cages, brushing fur, or visiting local veterinarians simply became one more item on an already lengthy list of tasks. Birth announcements, weddings, anniversaries, graduations, and funerals all required handwritten cards, thoughtful gifts, homemade meals, or carefully chosen flowers. Maintaining relationships demanded consistent effort because communication depended upon letters, telephone calls, and personal visits rather than instant messages. Women often remembered these important occasions, ensuring that family and friendships remained strong across many years. The arrival of new household products during the decade created genuine excitement. A modern refrigerator with more storage space, an improved electric mixer, a faster vacuum cleaner, or an automatic washing machine represented significant improvements that promised to reduce physical effort. Demonstrations in department stores attracted curious crowds eager to see the latest inventions. Yet even with these technological advances, most daily responsibilities still depended primarily upon personal labor rather than machines. Women's magazines frequently published articles explaining how to organize homes more efficiently, prepare economical meals, decorate living rooms according to current trends, or entertain guests gracefully. Many readers clipped favorite recipes and household tips, storing them carefully inside recipe boxes or scrapbooks. Over time, these collections became treasured, family heirlooms filled with handwritten notes, substitutions, and memories connected to special occasions. Some afternoons brought welcome surprises that interrupted routine in pleasant ways. A close friend might arrive carrying slices of homemade pie. A relative traveling through town could stop unexpectedly for coffee. Children might return from school proudly carrying excellent report cards or artwork they wanted displayed on the refrigerator. These ordinary moments of happiness balanced the repetitive nature of household work and reminded women why their efforts mattered. There were also difficult days when nothing seemed to go according to plan. Bread refused to rise properly. Children argued endlessly. Rain prevented laundry from drying. Unexpected expenses disrupted carefully balanced budgets, or illness spread through the household one family member after another. During such moments, women often relied upon patience developed through years of experience. Instead of abandoning responsibilities, they adjusted plans, solved problems one step at a time, and continued moving forward because there was rarely another option. Many women became remarkable storytellers without ever considering themselves writers. While preparing dinner or tucking children into bed, they shared family histories, favorite childhood memories, folk tales, Bible stories, or amusing events from their own youth. These conversations passed traditions from one generation to the next, long before they were ever written down. Children often remembered these bedtime stories throughout their entire lives, repeating them years later to their own families. As evening gradually settled over another ordinary day, familiar sounds once again filled the home. The ticking of a wall clock echoed softly through quiet rooms. Dishes clinked gently as they were stacked neatly into cupboards. The radio played its final program before signing off for the night. Children's footsteps grew quieter as they climbed the stairs toward bed. Outside, porch lights illuminated peaceful streets, while distant trains or passing automobiles reminded everyone that the wider world continued beyond their neighborhood. Finally, after checking every door, switching off every unnecessary light, and preparing everything possible for tomorrow morning. Many women paused for just a few moments before going to bed themselves. It was often the only completely quiet time they experienced all day, sitting in a favorite chair, finishing the last sip of tea, or simply listening to the peaceful silence of a sleeping house, offered a brief chance to reflect before another busy day began. Looking back today, it becomes clear that what 1950s women really did all day cannot be summarized with a simple list of chores. They organized entire households, managed limited budgets with remarkable precision, preserved family traditions, cared for children and elderly relatives, strengthened neighborhoods, solved countless everyday problems, and quietly created homes where others felt secure and loved. Their days were built from thousands of small decisions that rarely attracted public attention, but collectively shaped the lives of everyone around them. History often remembers the decade through its music, fashion, automobiles, and growing prosperity. Yet the true rhythm of the 1950s was often set inside ordinary homes, by women whose dedication, resilience, practical knowledge, and endless daily effort formed the unseen foundation of everyday life. Without their quiet work from dawn until long after sunset, the familiar image of the prosperous 1950s would never have existed in quite the same way. For many women, the end of one day never truly felt like an ending, because the responsibilities of tomorrow had already begun before they went to bed. Flour might be measured into a bowl for morning biscuits, beans left soaking overnight, children's lunches partly prepared, and clothing carefully laid out so the next sunrise would begin with fewer surprises. Experience had taught them that a little preparation in the evening could save precious minutes during the busy hours after dawn. Their minds rarely stopped organizing, even while the rest of the household slept peacefully. There was also an almost invisible rhythm to the sounds that filled an ordinary home. The steady ticking of the kitchen clock reminded them when bread should come out of the oven. The whistle of a kettle announced that tea was ready. The hum of a refrigerator, still a relatively modern appliance in many homes, blended with the gentle chatter of a radio playing softly in the background. Outside, children laughed while playing jump rope. Bicycles rattled across sidewalks, and distant lawn mowers signaled another warm afternoon in the neighborhood. These familiar sounds formed the soundtrack of everyday life, becoming so ordinary that few people noticed them until years later when they had disappeared. The front porch often became one of the most important places in the house. During pleasant evenings, women sat outside shelling peas, mending clothing, or simply enjoying cooler air after spending the day inside a warm kitchen. Neighbors walking past stopped to exchange greetings. Children raced along the sidewalks chasing one another, and conversations drifted lazily from one porch to another. News travelled surprisingly quickly through these casual chats. Someone might mention a new family moving into the neighborhood, an upcoming church picnic, or a local store offering a special discount on flour or canned goods. Long before neighborhood social media groups existed, these conversations kept communities connected. Many women became masters of stretching every household item far beyond its expected life. Bars of soap were combined when they became too small to hold comfortably. Candle stubs were saved and melted into new candles. Empty coffee tins found new purpose storing flour, sugar, nails, buttons, or sewing supplies. Glass jars became drinking glasses, flower vases, or containers for homemade jam. Worn blankets were cut apart to create pet bedding or protective covers for furniture during painting projects. Throwing useful items away simply felt wasteful when another purpose could almost always be found. Children's illnesses often meant long nights with very little sleep. Mothers stayed awake, checking temperatures every few hours, preparing warm drinks, replacing cool cloths on feverish foreheads, and listening carefully for signs that a cough had improved or become worse. By morning, they were often exhausted themselves, yet breakfast still needed preparing, laundry still waited, and the rest of the family's routines continued almost unchanged. Caring for sick family members demanded quiet endurance that was rarely recognized outside the home. School mornings carried their own familiar rush. Shoes needed polishing before children left the house. Hair had to be brushed neatly. Missing homework was searched for beneath beds and inside school bags. Lunchboxes were packed with sandwiches, fruit, and homemade treats. Mothers stood at front doors waving goodbye as children disappeared around street corners toward school, only to turn immediately back inside where another full day of household work waited. Many women also spent considerable time teaching practical life skills that were never part of classroom education. Sons learned how to polish shoes, mow lawns, or perform small household repairs. Daughters practiced baking bread, sewing simple garments, ironing shirts, or setting a dining table correctly for special occasions. These lessons usually happened naturally through shared work rather than formal instruction, while peeling potatoes together or folding laundry side by side. Conversations flowed easily, allowing family traditions and values to pass quietly from one generation to the next. Visits from traveling relatives often transformed ordinary weeks into memorable occasions. Spare rooms were cleaned thoroughly, extra meals planned carefully, and favorite family recipes prepared to welcome guests warmly. Even when homes were modest in size, women worked hard to ensure visitors felt comfortable. Fresh flowers might appear in guest bedrooms, clean towels folded neatly at the foot of beds, and homemade desserts waiting on kitchen counters upon arrival. Hospitality reflected generosity rather than wealth. The local library played an important role for many families. Women borrowed cookbooks filled with new recipes, gardening guides, sewing manuals, children's storybooks, and popular novels. Reading provided both practical knowledge and a welcome escape into different worlds beyond daily routines. Library visits often became regular weekly outings, especially during school holidays, when children eagerly searched for new adventures hidden inside books. Seasonal celebrations filled homes with traditions that required weeks of preparation. Easter meant carefully decorating eggs and preparing festive meals. Halloween involved sewing simple costumes by hand and welcoming neighborhood children with homemade treats. Thanksgiving required baking pies, roasting turkey, and arranging large family gatherings. Christmas transformed homes with handmade decorations, wrapped presents hidden in closets, and the comforting scent of cinnamon, cloves, and freshly baked cookies drifting through every room. Each celebration demanded countless hours of unseen effort long before guests ever arrived. Many women quietly developed remarkable leadership skills through volunteer organizations. They organized fundraising events, coordinated charity collections, planned church suppers, supervised youth activities, and managed community projects with impressive efficiency. Although these contributions rarely earned professional recognition, they demonstrated abilities that today would be admired in business managers, event planners, and organizational leaders. Not every family enjoyed financial comfort during the decade. Many women carefully counted every coin before shopping, choosing the least expensive ingredients while still creating filling meals. Leftover roast became sandwiches the following day, then soup the day after that. Bread nearing the end of its freshness turned into breadcrumbs or bread pudding. Vegetable scraps flavored homemade stock. Instead of being discarded, waste was considered almost unacceptable because every saved penny contributed toward household security. Entertainment inside the home relied heavily on imagination rather than expensive technology. Families gathered around card games, crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, musical instruments, or storytelling during quiet evenings. Mothers often taught children favorite songs from their own childhoods or shared memories of growing up during earlier decades. These simple activities strengthened family relationships in ways that required little money but plenty of shared time. As years passed, children gradually grew older, leaving for college, military service, marriage, or careers of their own. Many women watched with pride as the boys and girls they had cared for through countless sleepless nights became independent adults. Looking around quieter homes after children had moved away could bring mixed emotions. The same rooms once filled with toys, laughter, school books, and constant activity suddenly became peaceful. Yet every polished floor, carefully prepared meal, bedtime story, stitched school uniform, birthday cake, comforting hug, and encouraging word had quietly shaped those children's futures. Looking back from the modern world, it is easy to underestimate how physically demanding everyday life could be before many modern conveniences became common. Nearly every task required lifting, scrubbing, carrying, stirring, kneading, ironing, sweeping, polishing, walking, or standing for long hours. Yet despite the effort involved, millions of women approached each new day with determination because the work represented care for the people they loved. Their contributions rarely appeared in newspaper headlines, history books, or public celebrations, but they formed the invisible framework supporting families across an entire generation. In many ways, the true story of what 1950s women really did all day is not simply about cooking meals or cleaning houses. It is about creating stability in an ever-changing world. It is about remembering birthdays, soothing childhood fears during thunderstorms, stretching limited budgets through careful planning, welcoming neighbors with genuine kindness, preserving family recipes for future generations, teaching life lessons through everyday routines, and quietly solving hundreds of small problems before anyone else even noticed they existed. Their days were built from ordinary moments, yet those moments accumulated into extraordinary lives of service, resilience, patience, and unwavering dedication. Long after the dishes were washed, the laundry folded, and the lights switched off each evening, the influence of their work continued to shape families, neighborhoods, and generations in ways that are still felt today. As the decade moved forward, many women also found themselves balancing the old traditions they had inherited with the rapid changes, transforming the modern world around them. New supermarkets began replacing smaller neighborhood shops. Televisions slowly appeared in more living rooms, and advertisements promised that every new appliance would make life easier than ever before. Yet the reality inside most homes changed gradually, rather than overnight. A shiny new washing machine, still required someone to sort the clothes, remove stains by hand, hang garments to dry. If there was no dryer, fold everything neatly and return it to the correct drawers. A refrigerator kept food fresh longer, but meals still had to be planned, ingredients prepared, and dishes cooked from scratch. Technology reduced certain tasks but rarely removed the responsibility itself. One often overlooked part of daily life was the amount of walking women did inside their own homes. From the kitchen to the laundry room, upstairs to make beds, back downstairs to answer the telephone, outside to collect dry clothes from the line, into the garden to gather herbs, then back into the pantry to prepare dinner. They covered remarkable distances without ever thinking about it. By the end of the day, their feet were often tired from hours spent standing on hard kitchen floors or walking from room to room, completing dozens of small jobs that blended together into one continuous routine. The pantry reflected months of careful planning rather than spontaneous shopping. Shelves held neatly labelled jars of flour, sugar, oats, rice, coffee, tea, spices, and preserved fruits prepared during previous seasons. Women regularly checked supplies, rotating older items to the front so nothing spoiled. Running out of a basic ingredient unexpectedly was considered poor planning, so inventories were kept almost entirely from memory. Many homemakers knew exactly how much flour remained simply by lifting the storage container for a moment. Family recipes became treasured. Possessions passed quietly from one generation to another. Rather than following printed instructions exactly, mothers often cooked from memory, adding a pinch of this or just enough until it looks right. Daughters standing nearby gradually absorbed these techniques simply by watching. Measurements became instinctive after preparing the same dishes hundreds of times. A pie crust was judged by its texture rather than a stopwatch, bread by its smell rather than a timer, and soup by tasting it carefully. Instead of following precise instructions, women also became experts at recognizing the smallest details inside their homes. They noticed when a child seemed unusually quiet after school, when a husband's favorite chair developed a loose leg, when a curtain had begun fading from sunlight, or when a familiar sound coming from the refrigerator suggested it might soon need repairing. This constant awareness allowed many problems to be solved before they became serious. It was a form of observation developed through years of paying close attention to the people and surroundings they cared for every day. Mail delivery remained one of the highlights of the afternoon. The arrival of the postman often prompted a quick walk to the front gate or mailbox, bringing letters from relatives, utility bills, magazines, greeting cards, or catalogues, displaying the latest household products and fashions. A handwritten letter from a family member living far away could brighten an entire day. Many women sat down immediately to read every page before carefully placing it aside to answer later that evening. Community celebrations filled the calendar throughout the year. County fairs, school concerts, church festivals, parades, neighborhood picnics, and holiday celebrations all required preparation. Mothers baked cakes for competitions, stitched costumes for school plays, volunteered at refreshment stands, decorated community halls, and helped organize games for children. Although these events lasted only a day or two, the preparation often occupied weeks beforehand, Another regular responsibility involved caring for household linens. Tablecloths reserved for holidays were washed gently and ironed with special care. Lace curtains required delicate handling to prevent damage. Embroidered pillowcases made by mothers or grandmothers were treasured heirlooms, brought out only on special occasions. Even everyday towels and bedsheets received attention because replacing household textiles represented a significant expense for many families. Women often remembered the preferences of everyone around them with astonishing accuracy. One child disliked peas but loved carrots. Another preferred strawberry jam instead of raspberry. A husband liked his coffee slightly stronger on Monday mornings after busy weekends. Grandparents preferred softer vegetables because chewing had become difficult. Guests visiting from out of town always enjoyed a particular dessert prepared especially for them. These countless personal details were quietly remembered and incorporated into daily routines without anyone needing to ask. The changing weather influenced emotions as much as routines. Bright spring mornings encouraged windows to remain open while birdsong drifted through freshly cleaned rooms. Summer thunderstorms sent children rushing indoors, filling kitchens with muddy footprints and excited laughter. Crisp autumn afternoons carried the smell of burning leaves and fresh apple pies cooling on windowsills. Winter evenings gathered families close together around fireplaces, where knitting, storytelling, and quiet conversations continued long after darkness had settled outside. Many women rarely described themselves as hard-working because everyone around them lived similarly busy lives. Endless activity simply felt normal. Waking early, remaining busy until late evening, and placing family needs before personal comfort had become such familiar habits that they attracted little attention. Looking back today, however, the sheer amount of work completed within a single ordinary day appears extraordinary. One of the most meaningful parts of their lives involved preserving family traditions. Holiday recipes remained unchanged because they reminded everyone of previous generations. Wedding dresses were carefully stored in hopes that daughters might someday wear them. Family photographs were labeled with names and dates, so future grandchildren would know the faces of relatives they had never met. Handmade quilts stitched from pieces of worn clothing became lasting reminders of family history. Through these small acts, women quietly connected the past with the future. Even after children had grown into adults, many mothers continued caring for them in different ways. They welcomed married sons and daughters home for Sunday dinners, knitted blankets for new grandchildren, mailed homemade cookies to college students, and remained the first-person family members called when they needed advice, comfort, or encouragement. Their role changed over time but rarely disappeared. Perhaps the greatest misconception about the 1950s is that life moved slowly simply because technology was less advanced. In reality, many women experienced days that felt incredibly full. From the moment the first alarm clock rang before sunrise until the final kitchen light was switched off late at night, every hour carried purpose. There were meals to prepare, beds to make, floors to clean, budgets to balance, gardens to tend, clothes to repair, children to encourage, neighbours to help, relatives to visit, community events to support, and countless unexpected challenges waiting around every corner. When historians look back at the 1950s, they often discuss economic growth, suburban expansion, automobiles with gleaming chrome, colourful diners, rock and roll, and the rise of television. Yet behind nearly every one of those familiar images stood women whose daily efforts made ordinary family life possible. They created homes that offered warmth after long work days, stability during uncertain times, comfort during illness, celebration during holidays, and reassurance through thousands of quiet acts of kindness that rarely attracted public recognition. Their work was measured not in promotions or salaries, but in children who grew up feeling secure, meals shared around crowded tables, friendships strengthened across neighborhoods, traditions passed faithfully from one generation to the next, and homes that remained places of comfort despite the ordinary challenges of everyday life. What they really did all day cannot be captured simply by saying they cooked, cleaned, or cared for children. They managed complex households, solved problems with creativity, adapted constantly to changing circumstances, and quietly carried responsibilities that touched nearly every aspect of family life. Their days were filled with ordinary moments, but together those moments created the foundation upon which millions of families built their lives throughout the remarkable decade known as the 1950s. Even the earliest hours before sunrise carried a quiet sense of purpose. Many women became so accustomed to their routines that they often woke a few minutes before the alarm clock rang. The house remained completely silent, except for the soft creaking of wooden floors beneath careful footsteps. Looking out of the kitchen window, they might see newspaper boys riding bicycles through empty streets. The glow of distant street lamps reflecting on damp sidewalks, or the first hints of orange appearing along the horizon. These peaceful moments rarely lasted long, but they offered a brief pause before another demanding day began. There was satisfaction in being awake before everyone else, knowing that much of the day's success depended upon what happened during these quiet hours. Breakfast itself often revealed how much planning went unnoticed. Fresh bread might have been baked the previous afternoon. Butter softened at just the right time. Fruit washed before anyone entered the kitchen, and lunch ingredients already waiting nearby for later in the morning. While children hurried through breakfast and husbands checked newspapers for the latest headlines, mothers quietly observed everything around the table. They noticed which child seemed unusually tired, who had outgrown a pair of shoes, whether someone had finished their milk, or if a school project still sat forgotten on the counter. Their attention constantly shifted between dozens of small details that others rarely noticed. After everyone left the house, a different kind of silence settled over the rooms. Chairs were pushed back beneath the dining table, breakfast dishes soaked in warm water, and windows opened to let fresh air circulate through the home. Sunlight slowly crept across polished wooden floors while the day's work continued almost uninterrupted. Although many people imagined homemakers spending quiet afternoons relaxing, the opposite was usually true. Without interruptions from family members, this became the busiest time of the entire day because larger tasks could finally be completed efficiently. Closettes were carefully organized several times each year. Children's clothing was examined piece by piece to determine what still fit and what had become too small. Garments in good condition were folded neatly into boxes for younger brothers, sisters, cousins, or neighbors who might need them. Clothing was rarely discarded simply because fashions had changed. Practicality usually mattered far more than following the latest trend, especially for families carefully managing household expenses. Women also became remarkably skilled at removing stains using homemade methods passed down through generations. Lemon juice brightened white fabrics naturally. Baking soda removed stubborn odors. Vinegar helped soften laundry and clean windows. Salt treated fresh stains before they became permanent. These techniques were learned from mothers and grandmothers long before countless specialized cleaning products filled supermarket shelves. Experience served as the most trusted instruction manual. Another overlooked responsibility involved maintaining family records, birth certificates, marriage documents, insurance papers, medical receipts, school report cards, warranty booklets, and treasured family photographs were stored carefully in drawers or boxes where they could be found years later. Without computers or cloud storage, preserving important documents required thoughtful organization. Many women knew exactly where every family record could be located within seconds. The changing seasons also influenced what appeared inside wardrobes. As autumn approached, heavier blankets were removed from storage chests and aired outdoors before returning to beds. Wool coats were brushed clean and inspected for moth damage. Gloves, scarves, and hats were paired together neatly, so no time would be wasted searching for them once colder weather arrived. Spring brought the reverse process, with winter clothing cleaned carefully before being packed away until the following year. For mothers of teenagers, daily life included a different set of concerns. Conversations shifted toward school dances, driver's licenses, part-time jobs, college plans, and growing independence. They often found themselves offering advice while trying not to appear overly controlling. Watching children gradually require less direct care brought pride, but also quiet nostalgia. Bedrooms once filled with toys slowly transformed into spaces decorated with books, records, sports equipment, or posters reflecting changing interests. The family dining table witnessed nearly every important conversation. Celebrations, disappointments, financial discussions, future plans, holiday arrangements, and simple stories about ordinary days all unfolded around shared meals. Mothers usually made sure everyone had enough to eat before sitting down themselves, frequently standing to refill drinks or bring additional food from the kitchen. Even while participating in conversations, they remained quietly attentive to everyone's needs. Many women developed an impressive memory for household schedules without relying on written reminders. They remembered when library books were due, when the chimney required cleaning, which bills needed paying that week, when children had dentist appointments, and which relatives expected birthday cards before the month ended. Their ability to coordinate so many responsibilities simultaneously often went unnoticed, because everything simply appeared to happen on time. Afternoons occasionally offered opportunities for simple pleasures. A favorite radio program accompanied ironing. Fresh flowers cut from the garden brightened the kitchen table. A slice of homemade cake enjoyed with afternoon tea provided a brief moment of relaxation before children returned from school. Looking through seed catalogues inspired plans for next spring's garden, while browsing recipe books encouraged experimenting with new desserts for upcoming family gatherings. Neighborhood children frequently viewed certain houses as especially welcoming, often gathering there after school, because they knew fresh cookies, lemonade, or friendly conversation awaited them. Mothers naturally became familiar with many of their children's friends, learning their personalities, favorite snacks, and family situations. During difficult times, some children quietly found comfort in these welcoming kitchens where kindness was offered without expecting anything in return. The arrival of evening never truly meant that responsibilities had ended. School clothes were checked for missing buttons or torn seams before the next morning. Shoes were lined neatly beside bedroom doors. Kitchen towels were replaced with clean ones. Coffee was measured into the percolator ready for dawn. Even the breakfast table might be partially prepared the night before to make early mornings run more smoothly. These small acts of preparation reflected years of experience managing busy households where every saved minute mattered. One of the most remarkable aspects of everyday life was how rarely women expected recognition for these countless tasks. A successful day often meant that nothing unusual had happened at all. Meals were served on time, children arrived safely home from school, laundry was finished before rain began, bills were paid, floors were clean, everyone went to bed feeling secure. Success was measured by the smooth functioning of family life rather than praise or public acknowledgement. As decades passed, and many of these women grew older, they often looked back not on individual chores, but on the people those routines had supported. The countless sandwiches packed for school became memories of children growing into adults. Every birthday cake marked another year of family history. Every carefully stitched school uniform, every bedtime story, every comforting hug after a difficult day. Every holiday meal shared around crowded tables gradually formed a lifetime of memories that families carried long after the work itself had been forgotten. Perhaps that is why the ordinary life of a 1950s woman remains so fascinating today. It was never simply a story about washing dishes or sweeping floors. It was the story of someone quietly holding together the countless details that allowed family life to flourish through patience, organization, resilience, and an extraordinary ability to care for others while expecting very little. In return, millions of women created homes filled with warmth, stability, tradition, and love. Their names rarely appeared in newspapers, and history books seldom described the endless rhythm of their everyday lives. Yet behind every successful household stood hours upon hours of invisible work completed with remarkable dedication. In understanding what 1950s women really did all day, we discover that history is often shaped not only by famous leaders or dramatic events, but by ordinary people whose quiet daily efforts became the foundation upon which entire generations built their lives. As the years passed, routines became so familiar that many women could complete complicated tasks almost without thinking. Their hands moved confidently from one chore to the next, while their minds planned everything that still needed to be accomplished before sunset. They could knead bread while reminding a child to finish homework, keep an eye on vegetables simmering on the stove while repairing a loose button, or listen to a favorite radio program while ironing an entire basket of freshly washed clothes. Multitasking was not a fashionable expression in the 1950s, but it was something countless women practiced every single day without giving it a name. The smell of an ordinary home changed throughout the day in ways that reflected these routines. Early mornings carried the comforting aroma of coffee, toast, and bacon drifting through open kitchen doors. By mid-morning, the scent of soap, furniture polish, and freshly washed laundry filled the air as cleaning continued from room to room. Afternoon often brought the sweet fragrance of cakes, cookies, or bread baking inside warm ovens, while evenings were filled with the rich smell of hearty dinners shared around family tables. These familiar scents became part of childhood memories that many people remembered long after they could no longer recall specific conversations or events. Rainy afternoons created a peaceful atmosphere that slowed life only slightly. Raindrops tapped gently against windows, while steam rose from soup simmering on the stove. Children sat around dining tables drawing pictures, assembling puzzles, or reading library books while their mother continued sewing, knitting, or planning the week's meals. The outside world seemed temporarily distant, as the house became a place of warmth and comfort against the grey skies beyond the windows. Many women also became surprisingly knowledgeable about local events, because they remained closely connected to the community throughout the day. They knew which families had recently welcomed new babies, who had fallen ill, whose son had graduated from school, and which neighbour might need extra help after an accident or difficult financial situation. News spread naturally through conversations at grocery stores, churches, schools, beauty salons, and neighbourhood visits. This close-knit environment meant people often looked after one another in practical ways rather than simply expressing sympathy. Another responsibility rarely discussed today involved preparing children to behave respectfully in public. Before visiting relatives, attending church, or eating at restaurants, mothers reminded children to speak politely, sit still, thank their hosts, and show consideration toward older people. Good manners were practiced repeatedly at home because they reflected not only on the child, but also on the entire family. Teaching these habits required patience and consistency over many years. Seasonal clothing demanded careful storage and maintenance. Winter coats were brushed clean before being packed away with mothballs to protect them until the following year. Summer dresses were washed, ironed, and hung neatly inside wardrobes. Shoes received regular polishing regardless of whether they were new or several years old. Since replacing clothing frequently remained expensive for many households, taking proper care of every item became second nature. The kitchen calendar often served as the family's unofficial command center. Important dates, shopping reminders, church meetings, school holidays, birthdays, and appointments were written carefully in pencil. Nearby hung handwritten grocery lists that gradually grew longer as ingredients ran low. Every small note represented another responsibility quietly managed behind the scenes. One remarkable quality shared by many women was their ability to adapt whenever unexpected situations appeared. If guests arrived unexpectedly, another place setting somehow appeared at the dinner table, and extra food was stretched to feed everyone comfortably. If electricity failed during a storm, meals were adjusted using whatever remained possible to prepare. If a child suddenly became ill before school, the entire day's schedule changed without complaint. Flexibility became one of the most valuable household skills because no 2 days unfolded exactly the same way. The relationship between mothers and grandparents often remained especially strong. Grandmothers visited to share family recipes, teach sewing techniques, help care for newborn babies, or simply spend afternoons talking over cups of tea. These visits strengthened family traditions while allowing practical knowledge to pass naturally from one generation to another. Young children listened quietly as stories from earlier decades filled living rooms with memories of times that seemed almost unbelievable. Even then, the local market changed with each season, and women learned to cook according to whatever ingredients were freshest and most affordable. Strawberries signaled the beginning of summer desserts. Pumpkins appeared as autumn approached, and hearty root vegetables became staples during colder months. Instead of expecting every fruit and vegetable throughout the year, families adjusted naturally to seasonal availability. Meals reflected the rhythm of nature rather than the convenience of global transportation. Simple pleasures often brought genuine happiness after long days of work. Watching clean sheets flutter on a clothesline beneath a bright blue sky, hearing children laughing safely in the backyard, removing a perfectly baked pie from the oven, receiving a kind letter from a distant relative, or sitting quietly on the porch as the sun disappeared beyond the rooftops were moments that required no expensive entertainment. Satisfaction frequently came from seeing ordinary responsibilities completed well. Many women quietly became historians of their own families. They remembered where treasured furniture had originally come from, which recipe belonged to a beloved grandmother, why a certain photograph had been taken, or how a handmade quilt contained pieces of clothing once worn by several generations. Through conversations around dinner tables and family gatherings, these stories survived long after the people themselves were gone. As evening deepened, neighborhoods gradually became quieter. Porch lights glowed softly along tree-lined streets. Radios played evening news broadcasts through open windows, and children reluctantly ended their games as parents called them inside. Kitchens bustled one final time as dishes were washed and tomorrow's preparations quietly began. Outside, the occasional passing automobile disturbed the silence before disappearing once again into the night. Eventually, every light in the house except one was switched off. The last cup was placed back inside the cupboard, the final chair pushed neatly beneath the table, and one more glance confirmed that doors were locked and windows secured. Standing for a brief moment in the quiet kitchen, many women reflected on another ordinary day that had somehow disappeared almost without notice. It may not have seemed remarkable while they were living it, but each completed day represented hundreds of decisions, countless acts of care, and hours of physical effort that helped their families feel safe, comfortable, and loved. Today, when people imagine the 1950s, they often picture polished automobiles, cheerful diners, colourful advertisements, suburban neighbourhoods, and perfectly dressed families smiling for cameras. Yet those familiar images reveal only part of the story. Behind every clean home, every family celebration, every carefully packed school lunch, every holiday tradition, and every comforting evening meal stood women whose daily efforts rarely attracted attention because they blended so naturally into everyday life. They were planners, teachers, caregivers, cooks, accountants, seamstresses, gardeners, organizers, volunteers, listeners, problem solvers, and the steady presence that allowed countless households to function smoothly. Their work was rarely dramatic, but it was constant. It demanded strength, patience, creativity, endurance, and an extraordinary ability to place the needs of others before their own. Through thousands of ordinary moments repeated day after day, month after month, and year after year, they quietly shaped not only the lives of their own families, but also the character of an entire generation. Their legacy was never measured in headlines or awards, but in the lasting memories, traditions, values, and sense of home that continued to live on long after the dishes had been washed, the lights had been turned off, and another ordinary day in the 1950s had come to an end. Yet there was another side to everyday life that was far less visible than the polished advertisements and cheerful magazine covers of the era. Not every day unfolded according to plan, and many women quietly faced moments of disappointment, worry, and uncertainty, without allowing those feelings to interrupt the routines their families depended upon. A broken washing machine could mean spending an entire day washing clothes by hand. A sick child might require constant attention while dinner still had to be prepared for everyone else. Unexpected bills could force difficult decisions about what purchases would have to wait until the following month. These challenges were rarely dramatic enough to make history, but they tested patience and resilience almost every week. Many women became experts at reading the moods of the people around them. They could often tell that something had happened at school simply by the way a child closed the front door after arriving home. They noticed when a husband remained unusually quiet during dinner, when an elderly parent sounded tired over the telephone, or when a neighbor's cheerful greeting suddenly seemed forced. Long before anyone explained what was wrong, they often sensed that someone needed comfort, encouragement, or simply a patient listener. Family traditions rarely survived by accident. Someone had to remember exactly how grandmother prepared Thanksgiving stuffing, which Christmas ornaments had belonged to great-grandparents, or which birthday cake every child requested each year. Mothers quietly became the keepers of these traditions, repeating them so faithfully that children eventually assumed they had always existed. Years later, many adults discovered that their happiest childhood memories had required weeks of preparation they had never noticed at the time. Houseplants also became part of daily routines in many homes. Ferns, ivy, African violets, and other popular plants decorated sunny windowsills where they received careful watering, occasional trimming, and regular attention. These small touches brought life indoors and reflected the pride many women took in creating pleasant surroundings without spending large amounts of money. Another responsibility involved keeping household linens in excellent condition. Pillowcases were embroidered with decorative patterns, tablecloths were starched and ironed until perfectly smooth, and hand towels reserved for guests remained neatly folded until visitors arrived. Even everyday items were cared for with remarkable attention, because replacing them frequently simply was not practical for most families. When children reached school age, mothers often became deeply involved in their education, despite rarely entering classrooms. They practiced multiplication tables during dinner, listened patiently as spelling words were repeated aloud, helped construct science projects using cardboard and glue, and encouraged reading by making regular trips to the public library. Report cards were celebrated, poor grades discussed calmly, and school performances attended with genuine pride regardless of how small the role might have been. For women living in farming communities, life followed the seasons even more closely than the calendar. Sunrise marked the beginning of chores regardless of whether it was a weekday or holiday. Chickens needed feeding every morning, cows required milking, gardens demanded constant attention, and harvest seasons transformed entire households into busy workplaces. Women often balanced traditional homemaking responsibilities while contributing directly to the family's agricultural work, creating days that stretched from dawn until long after sunset. In growing suburban neighborhoods, however, another lifestyle emerged. Newly built houses lined freshly paved streets, each with similar lawns, driveways, and front porches. Children rode bicycles safely through neighborhoods where nearly everyone knew one another. Women gathered for coffee after finishing morning chores, exchanged recipes clipped from newspapers, discussed the latest television programs, and organized community events together. These neighborhoods created strong friendships that often lasted for decades. Beauty standards also influenced daily routines in subtle ways. Women frequently took pride in presenting themselves neatly, even when spending the entire day at home. Dresses were chosen carefully, lipstick applied before answering the front door, and hair brushed several times throughout the day. Looking well-groomed reflected self-respect as much as fashion. At the same time, these expectations sometimes created pressure to appear cheerful and composed even on difficult days. The family budget remained a constant consideration behind nearly every decision. A new dress might be postponed because children's school shoes took priority. Holiday decorations were reused year after year instead of replaced. Curtains were shortened and resewn rather than purchasing new ones. Furniture remained in homes for decades because it was repaired instead of discarded. These careful choices allowed many families to enjoy stable lives despite limited incomes. Even entertainment reflected creativity rather than consumption. Families spread picnic blankets beneath shady trees during summer afternoons, visited local parks, attended county fairs, or gathered around pianos for sing-alongs if someone in the family played music. Card games lasted late into the evening. Puzzles remained on dining tables for days until completed. And homemade ice cream became a special treat, shared with neighbors on warm weekends. Joy often came from simple experiences rather than expensive outings. The arrival of a newborn transformed household routines completely. Mothers spent long nights feeding infants, rocking them gently back to sleep, washing countless cloth diapers, sterilizing baby bottles, and trying to complete ordinary chores whenever the baby finally rested. Sleep often came in short periods rather than full nights. Yet older children's routines continued unchanged. Breakfast still had to appear on the table. School lunches still needed packing, and laundry somehow continued growing larger with each passing day. Women also played an important role in preserving neighborhood harmony. Small disagreements between children were often settled before they grew into larger conflicts. New families moving into the area received warm welcomes, sometimes with homemade cakes or freshly baked bread delivered to their front doors. During times of illness or hardship, neighbors quietly organized meals or helped with errands until life returned to normal. These acts of kindness strengthened communities in ways that statistics can never fully capture. Perhaps one of the most remarkable qualities developed through these routines was patience. Waiting formed a surprisingly large part of everyday life. Waiting for bread to rise, waiting for laundry to dry on clotheslines, waiting for letters to arrive from distant relatives, waiting for children to return safely from school, waiting for husbands to come home from work, waiting for cakes to cool before decorating them, and waiting for gardens to produce vegetables after weeks of careful tending. Modern life often values speed above all else, but the rhythm of the 1950s taught many women that worthwhile things frequently required time. Late at night, after another busy day had quietly come to an end, many women looked around homes that had grown silent once more. Toys had been put away, dishes washed, curtains drawn closed, and tomorrow's responsibilities already waited patiently in the kitchen. There was little applause for completing another ordinary day successfully, no audience to recognize the countless small decisions made from morning until night. Yet within those ordinary hours existed extraordinary dedication. Every meal served, every tear comforted, every budget balanced, every shirt carefully ironed, every family tradition preserved, every encouraging conversation, and every quiet sacrifice became part of a much larger story. When people remember the 1950s today, they often focus on iconic images of chrome-covered automobiles, jukeboxes, diners, suburban streets, and fashionable clothing. But those images only tell part of the story. The real heartbeat of the decade echoed inside millions of ordinary homes where women spent their days creating stability, warmth, discipline, kindness, and belonging. Their work was not glamorous, and it rarely attracted public recognition, but it shaped the daily experiences of husbands, children, relatives, neighbors, and entire communities. Through patience, skill, determination, and quiet love, expressed in thousands of practical ways, they built homes that became places of comfort in an ever-changing world. Their lives remind us that history is not written only through great speeches, famous inventions, or world-changing events. It is also written through ordinary mornings in quiet kitchens, afternoons spent caring for others, evenings gathered around family tables, and the countless unseen moments of dedication that gave meaning to everyday life throughout the remarkable decade of the 1950s.